What up, you fluffy bastards? My name is Liquid Blitz, and today we're going to take a look at everything to do with the scout class and sniping, from weapon and equipment choices to the different sort of playstyles needed for each type of weapon. We're going to look at general info and definitions, things like zeroing and what it really means in depth. And I'm going to cover the damage levels for each weapon, talking about the sweet spot distance for each weapon, giving you a good idea of which weapon you should use in different circumstances. And finally, I'm going to include some basic demonstrations for certain pieces of equipment, just to make sure we're all using them correctly. I'm going to save the demonstrations for last because at least half of you won't be interested in watching something you already know, so by putting it at the end, it lets you leave the video if you're not interested. And a couple of the demonstrations I've done before, namely bipod and sort of trip bomb setup, but I figured I might as well include it in this all-encompassing ultimate guide video. Now, for this video, I'm going to do something new. If you know my videos well, then you know I always put the info that I'm talking about on screen. Well, today I'm going to annotate each section so you can skip forward to whichever section you want to, in any order you want to watch them in. Just in case you want to skip certain parts, but that being said, I still recommend you watch the entire thing. And if you're watching on a device that doesn't support annotations, I'm going to include all the timestamps as well in the description box. Now let's move on to the first section of the video. Now I'm going to try and talk quick and be quick, because this video, the sheer number of bullet points I've got on my screen to talk about, talking points, is more than I've ever done before, so this video is going to be really, really long. So let's move on. The first section I'm going to discuss are scout weapon variants. Now I'm going to go into a lot more detail here than I've done in the past. Now the first variant is the much-loved sniper variant. It has a 5 to 10 times scope on it, it has a bipod equipped, and it produces scope glints, so enemies can, if you're looking down your scope, enemies can see you from miles away, if you're looking in their direction. Now with the sniper variant, you can hold your breath to keep your aim steady for 2 seconds. Now 2 seconds is a very short time, but it's because, in my opinion, it has a heavy-ass bipod on the front of it, which, when used, removes all weapon sway completely, so it's pinpoint accurate. And because it's got a heavy thing on the front of it, a 2 second sort of hold breath timer is sort of logical when you think about it. Sniper variants are clearly the best long range option. The second variant is the marksman variant. Now this has a 2.5 to 4 times scope on it with no bipod, and it produces no scope glint. Anything 4 times and under, generally speaking, doesn't produce scope glint. And now here's the big strength of a marksman weapon. It has an 8 seconds hold breath time, which is a long time, but it's sort of necessary since it has no bipod to steady your aim. Marksman variants are definitely the best medium range option. Next variant is the infantry variant. Now this has a 1 to 2 times zoom iron sight. It only has iron sights. And once again, you can only hold your breath for 2 seconds with this type. It has no aim down sight interruption, and the infantry weapon's strength is it has a faster recoil recovery. Now, by no aim down sight interruption, I mean you can rechamber the next round without lowering your weapon down from your sight, letting you shoot more accurately, quicker. Whereas sniper and marksman weapons, you actually lower the scope, you lower the weapon each time you chamber a round. And that is a big deal, that greatly changes your playstyle and how rapidly you can take down a target. Infantry variants are the best for close to medium range, alongside the carbine. And speaking of the carbine, that has a 1.25 to 2.5 times lens sight. And once again, it has a 2 second hold breath timer, and as with the infantry rifle, it has no aim down sight interruption. And the strength of the carbines, what makes them different to infantry is that they have better hipfire accuracy and moving accuracy, so they're more accurate when you're strafing, and that's a big deal. Now keep in mind that infantry weapons' iron sights and carbines' lens sights, they do move around a little bit when you rechamber your round. But as long as you sort of don't move your aim, your crosshair will go back to where it was before you rechambered the round. Generally speaking, the same goes for sniper and marksman, but the big downside there is because you lower your scope, you lose sight of your target for a second, making it sort of much easier to generally lose your bearings and lose your target. Now in my opinion, carbine variants are best for close range because of the extra hipfire and moving accuracy. Now the next couple of variants I'm not going to put on the screen because I have a very limited and valuable screen space because of the sheer amount of info I've got for this video. Now the first is the M1903 Experimental, that's the variant. Now this is a very unique gun. It has an enormous mag size of 41, which is larger than most LMGs. It fires much smaller caliber rounds than other scout rifles, doing much less damage. But conversely, it has a very fast fire rate. I can literally barely click as fast as this thing can fire, seriously. So generally speaking, it's a very spammable weapon, and it can actually be great fun to use. And then moving on, secondly, we have the Russian 1895 Trench variant. That's the only trench scout weapon. Compared to its infantry and sniper counterparts, it has a smaller round so it does less damage, with a 2-shot kill max and a 3-shot kill minimum, not including headshots of course. It also, and this is where its strengths come into play, it fires over twice as fast as the 1895 sniper and infantry versions. And it has a much better moving accuracy like the carbine variants. And the last thing to mention about the 1895 trench is the muzzle velocity is about 2/3 that of the infantry and sniper versions, making its bullet drop far worse. So only ever consider the 1895 trench for close range really only. Right, anyway, let's move on to the next section. Zeroing your rifle correctly. If you don't know much about sniping or sort of ranged combat, you might not know exactly what zeroing really means. I spoke to a guy last week who's played Battlefield 1 since release, just like me, and he still didn't know what zeroing actually means. So I thought I would throw it in quickly for sort of the good of everyone, really. And my cat has just jumped on the desk, so if my camera starts wobbling, as it is now, you camera wobbling bastard! Furry bastard! In simple terms, zeroing your rifle to a certain distance means your shots will be pinpoint accurate at objects at that distance. So let's use an example. Let's use 150 meters as an example. If you shoot at a target 150 meters away, you will be pinpoint accurate. In terms of bullet drop, you will be pinpoint accurate. If you shoot at a target 200 meters away, so it's further than your zero value, you will have a slight bullet drop before you hit your target. And if you shoot at a target 100 meters away, so closer than your zero value, your bullet will actually go above the target and miss altogether. So in layman's terms, zeroing your rifle is just sort of an automatic way of correcting bullet drop at certain distances. Now I would say get into the habit of remembering to check your zero value before you engage a new target. It's very easy to sort of forget about it. The next piece of advice I would give you is to keep your zero value below your target distance. Because if your enemy sort of stood up and you have some bullet drop, it can still hit their sort of body and legs. But if you shoot over the target, obviously it just completely misses. So basically you want a bit of leeway below your aim, not above it. That being said, if you know there is going to be a little bit of bullet drop because they're further away than your zero value, try to compensate by aiming above your target a little bit. The amount you have to compensate differs depending on the muzzle velocity of the weapon you're using. The higher the velocity, the more accurate it is and less bullet drop you'll have. Now, just for the sake of being as detailed as humanly possible and as giving you as much info as possible, I'm going to show you a nice chart showing you all the sort of velocities for each rifle, starting with the highest first, working our way down to the lowest. The highest velocity and the most accurate rifle is the Gouveia 98, all three variants of it. It has a muzzle velocity of 880 meters a second, which is fast as balls. So that's the most accurate. Then, next on the list, are the Russian 1895, the infantry and sniper versions, 820 meters per second. Also 820 is the M1903, the marksman and sniper versions. 820 is a little bit less than the Gouveia 98, but it's still pretty damn accurate, so all four of those weapons are just a little bit less accurate than the Gouveia 98. Now, the next down the list is the SMLE Mark III, all three variants. They have a muzzle velocity of 740 meters per second. Then we have all three variants of the Gouveia M95 with a muzzle velocity of 620. Then the Russian 1895, the trench variety at 580. The Martini Henry at 440, we're getting much slower now. And then finally the M1903 experimental at just a measly 400. Anyway, back to our sexy facts. The sniper, marksman and infantry variants can all be 0 to 75 meters, 150 or 300 meters. You can toggle between these instantly at any time by using the key which normally toggles your fire mode. All the others, the carbine, the trench and the experimental, are all zeroed automatically to 75 meters. Now, how to know the distance to your target? Well, you can always use an objectives marker and it tells you how far it is. And you can sort of use that to sort of figure out the relative distance in any direction. Over time, you will get much better and more used to having a natural instinct for distance. But if you want a sort of a more concrete tool to help you figure out distances, the trench periscope shows you the exact distance to whatever you're looking at. It's a very underrated and underused tool, but more on that in the equipment section later. Anyway, talking about distance, that's a very nice sort of segue into the next section, weapon sweet spots. Most weapons in the game do their highest damage at point-blank range, and then at a certain distance, the damage will start to fall gradually until it levels out at the weapon's minimum damage. Standard shit. But in Battlefield 1, most sniper rifles act differently. The way most scout weapons work is they start off at the minimum damage, which I know it sounds a bit odd, but they do the minimum damage close up, then at a certain distance, the damage sort of climbs up to its maximum for a short distance, and then it will gradually fall back down to its minimum again. Now, I'm not an expert on rifles, and I don't know why this is the case. Maybe it's just for sort of balance purposes, so they're not too powerful close up. But yeah, most scout rifles do their maximum damage from quite a distance away. And that max damage lasts for a very specific range before it starts to fall back down to its minimum again. Now this max damage range is called the weapon's sweet spot. This is the distance away from your target you need to be to do the highest amount of damage with that weapon. Again, I'm going to show you all these values in order, starting with the closest sweet spot, working my way to the furthest distance sweet spot. First of all, we have the Martini Henry, which does its highest damage between 42 meters and 68 meters away, and it does 112 damage at its max, which is more than any other scout weapon, by the way. Then we have the SMLE Mark III, all three variants. Their highest damage is from 40 meters to 75 meters. Then we have the Russian 1895, the infantry and sniper versions. They do their highest damage at between 60 meters and 100 meters. And then moving further away still, we've got the Gouveia 98, all three variants. They do the max damage between 80 meters and 125 meters. And finally, the longest range weapon in the game, the M1903, the marksman and sniper variants. They do their max damage between 100 meters and 150 meters. And they are the M1903 sniper was my star weapon in my railgun superclass. Now, the reason that a minute ago I said most scout weapons is because there are some which don't work like this. There are three rifles which work the same as any other weapon. They start at max damage and then just drop off to the minimum over a certain range, just like any other weapon. The first of these is the Russian 1895, the trench version. It starts at 79 damage and it lasts until 18 meters and then it starts to taper off. And the second is the M1903, the experimental version. Now this is a lot less damage. This is 23 damage until 14 meters and then it starts to fall even more. And finally, we have the Gouveia M95, all three variants of it. It starts at 90 damage, which is high, and then at 20 meters, it starts to taper off down to its minimum damage again. Now, something to take note of at this point is that the Gouveia M95 does more damage up close than any other scout weapon, joint with the Martini Henry. They both do 90 damage up to 20 meters, and then the Martini Henry starts to climb to its maximum, while the M95 starts to fall down to its minimum. You see, all sweet spot rifles except the Martini Henry do 80 damage minimum and 100 damage maximum, before body part multipliers count, of course. Anyway, this means that up to 20 meters, the M95 is just as powerful as the Martini Henry, and a lot of people don't seem to know that. So yeah, if you're playing very close range, the Gouveia M95 is actually the best weapon, because obviously it does the same damage as the Martini Henry, but it shoots a lot faster than the Martini Henry. So up close, there's nothing that can beat the Gouveia M95 in the scout class. Anyway, let's move on to equipment choices and when to use each one sort of depending on your sort of play style. Now, if you don't want to hear about the current piece of equipment that I'm talking about, you can always skip forward using the annotations or the timestamps in the description. First of all, we have the flare gun, both the spot and the flash varieties. The spot version literally spots all enemies within a certain radius wherever you fire it. Now, this is possibly the most effective equipment in the entire scout class, in my opinion. I love the spot flare, particularly for close and medium range, if you're playing with sort of infantry and carbine weapons, or maybe sort of a low zoom marksman weapon. That being said, it's just as helpful to your team regardless of what weapon you're using, really. Then we have the flash version, which blinds enemies in very close range. Now, 99% of people that use the flare gun use the spot version, and rightfully so, it's a very powerful tool. But the flash version, it gets progressively brighter the closer you move to it. I mean, if you're looking in its general direction within about 5 to 10 meters, you're completely blind, and it works great in conjunction with smoke grenades for confusing the shit out of your enemies. But be warned, it does blind yourself too, so don't fire it somewhere you're about to move to. Anyway, for both flare gun varieties, you start with 2 of them, and they can be resupplied by ammo packs. But keep in mind you can only have 2 active flares at any one time. If you resupply and fire a third, it cancels the first one you shot. And it's also worth noting that both flare types do minor fire damage upon contact. If an enemy runs over it, they'll take a bit of damage. Not as much damage as like an incendiary grenade or an incendiary trip bomb, but a little bit of damage, and it always helps. Anyway, next is the trench periscope, which I briefly mentioned before. It shows the exact distance to whatever you're looking at. And more importantly, I suppose, it lets you look over cover and spot enemies without actually moving out of cover yourself. So if you use this, you can look around and enemies can't see you. Now, this obviously works best at things like walls, where you can crouch behind something sort of hip height and look over using the trench periscope. Next on the list are the tripwire bombs. Now, these provide seriously good defense. Now, in my opinion, these are most useful when you're using a very long-range weapon like a sniper variant, since those weapons are the worst for close-range combat, and you need as much defense as humanly possible. The tripwires do a very good job of sort of filling that close-range defense gap, if you see what I mean. Now, as for which one you choose to use, in my opinion, the gas one is useless, because they could just put on a gas mask and keep coming at you. So for me, it's a choice between fire and explosive. Now, explosive will almost certainly kill a single target, But the incendiary version will sort of prevent enemies getting at you long enough for you to run away, or if you prefer to stay where you are, the enemy will have to go prone to put the fire out, making them an easy-ass target to finish off with your pistol. Right, now I've launched the game to quickly help me demonstrate how to properly place a tripwire. Piece of information number 1, whenever you place it, wherever you place it, the wire will always shoot away from you. Always shoot in the opposite direction of the trip bomb. There you go. It's always away from you. Now, the second piece of information, as you just saw there, if you screw up the placement or want to pick it up and place it somewhere else, you can pick it up. So, no matter how many times you screw up the placement, you can always pick it up. Now, onto the advice of actually placing it. You want to keep the wire as hidden as possible. Now, if you want to attach it to a wall, all you do is face the wall and attach it. It will always attach the wall. But if you do that, as you've just seen there, I mean, that's shit. Anyone can see that from a mile around. To avoid doing that, you want to, if you're putting it against a wall or an object, you want to bring it further out, and it'll go flat. There you go. I mean, that is much, much better than sort of going up there really high, where everyone can see it. So that's basically the advice I've got for you. Keep the wire as low as humanly possible. And if you're not attaching it to a wall, I mean, half the time you don't want to attach it to walls anyway. You just want it sort of in, like, across doorways, things like that. In that case, if you just put it down with no sort of wall away from you, so it's just sort of out in the open, it will always go flat. Nice and simple as that. And it's best placed in places where, I mean, this is a bad example on this map, but it's best to place the wire sort of where there might be debris or tall grass, you know, just basically try and hide the wire as much as possible. And hopefully that demonstration has sort of helped you a little bit. Now, the next piece of equipment is the sniper shield, which generally provides additional cover. Now, there are only 2 situations in which you should use the shield. First, when you're using a bipod with a sniper variant weapon. Because if you have a bipod down, as long as you're not sort of like at a window frame, you're generally exposed anyway. So you might as well use the shield in front of your bipod. And second, when you sort of use the shield as sort of a mini wall for a bit of extra cover wherever you are, I strongly advise that you don't sort of necessarily use the center hole and stay still all the time, because if you do, you are just an easy kill for anyone with a decent aim. So if you're using the bipod tactic from a long range, make sure you sort of pick it up and displace regularly to stop yourself becoming a sitting duck. And if you're using it as sort of just an extra bit of cover, like I like to do, just use it as like an extra bit of wall. Look around the sides of it or over the top of it, and don't just hide behind the hole. Next piece of equipment is the sniper decoy. Now, this is largely pointless in my opinion. When you put it down, it can be spotted by enemies, so it looks just like a player. And when it gets hit, it spots the person who shot it. Don't get me wrong, now that is obviously useful, but generally speaking, you're going to put it down somewhere close to where you are, unless you put it down and just run miles away. And if it gets spotted near you, then people are going to be looking in your general direction, which ain't good. And regardless of who or what gets spotted, people can still see your bullet trace and your scope glint in the distance anyway. So yeah, it's largely pointless in my opinion, at least compared to the other equipment choices. It's a waste of a slot. And the final piece of equipment is something much more useful, K-bullets, which are armor-piercing rounds which can damage vehicles. The main piece of info you need to know about the K-bullets are, it does more damage the closer you are to your target. The damage drops off surprisingly quickly, and I've tried to find the official range of the K-bullets, but I can't find it anywhere on the internet. But to my own sort of testing and research, its range seems to stop at about 100 meters-ish. I've shot vehicles about 100 meters away and nothing happens. And anyway, because they do more damage the closer you are, the K-bullets are sort of best used, in my opinion, with infantry and carbine weapons, where you're going to be much closer to the action than with a marksman weapon, and especially a sniper weapon. Now, the next piece of information is probably the greatest strength of the K-bullet, and that is that they can interrupt enemy vehicle repair cycles, whilst obviously doing damage to the vehicle. Now, this gives you, and more importantly, the rest of your team, a much greater chance of destroying a vehicle if you can stop it repairing itself. And you get 5 of these things, so if you time them well, you basically have 5 interrupts of vehicle repair, which is awesome. So K-bullets are always a nice sort of go-to equipment if you don't know what to equip, really. Of course, only on maps with vehicles. I should add that. If you're on like Argonne Forest, then K-bullets are pointless. Now that's it for weapons, equipment. I'm not going to go into depth with grenades. I've got an entire video based on which grenade to choose. But I will sort of generally advise that you choose a grenade based on how it can improve your main weakness. For example, if you're using sort of a long-range sniper and you're far away from the action, I'd advise you use an incendiary or sort of an impact grenade, because both of them explode pretty damn fast in the case of an enemy running up out of nowhere. And with fire, it will block their advance, and if they get hit by the fire, then they have to go prone, as with the incendiary trip bomb, and it makes them an easy target to finish off with your pistol. And with the impact grenade, if it doesn't kill them, then it's going to do a lot of damage to them. Again, making it much easier to finish off with your pistol or melee weapon. Now, if you're sort of more close range with an infantry or carbine weapon or the Martini Henry, then it's largely up to you. Incendiary is always a great option to default to, but with close range, it's a much tougher decision because all the grenades have their upsides and downsides, and it's much more down to sort of personal preference. So I'm going to leave it at that. Now, the final thing I'm going to include in this video is something a lot of you can skip probably: bipod placement, correct bipod placement. This is useful for the Scout class and Support class, and the Assault class, because the AT rocket has the same mechanic as the bipod. So everything I'm about to show you to do with the bipod works for the AT rocket as well. Right, I've launched the game again to quickly help me demonstrate bipod placement, and I know what you're thinking, that's probably simple and basic, but a lot of people don't sort of realise the unlimited things you can do with it. Most people think you have to go prone to use the bipod, or you have to like run up to a ledge and use the bipod. First piece of information, number one. When your gun goes down steady like that, like, hang on, 3, 2, 1, there. That means the bipod is erected with Support class and Scout class. That means officially the bipod is being used. And you can see there's 0 scope sway there. 0 scope sway. Now, you don't have to be prone or up against a ledge. All you need is a surface perpendicular to your gun's aim. Like, I mean, you can, look, there. There. The bipod is officially down. Weirdest place ever, but it's down. I mean, you could put it anywhere. I mean, a good tip, not here, but at the top of stairs, you can go crouch and put the bipod down. I mean, the possibilities really are endless. So just be clever with where you place it, and all you need is, there you go, it's down. As soon as the gun placement moves like down a little bit, that officially means it's working. So yeah, there you go again. All you need is a surface. You can put it on almost literally anything. You can, there you go. I mean, you know, the world is your oyster. And as I just said, whatever works with the bipod works with the AT rocket. So if I had an AT rocket, I could lean up against this wall, aim up and fire up at a plane. So yeah, that's how these work. Anyway, that's all I've got for you. I mean, I was originally going to include a section called Playstyle, discussing the differences between sort of long-range loadouts and close-range loadouts. But honestly, I've covered both weapons and equipment in sort of such detail that you can decide for yourself what you should be using depending on if you want to stay long-range or if you want to get close-range all up in the action with a faster, easier-to-control weapon like a carbine or an infantry. So I hope any of this helped. I mean, now, hopefully, however you fancy playing, whether you sort of fancy being like a loner in the distance, or you want to be capturing objectives with your teammates right there in the action, you should have a pretty good idea of what equipment and weapon you should be using. And now, before this video gets any longer, I'm going to end it. Like this video if you liked it, like this video if you didn't like it, and join me in my next video. The next video is probably going to be another superclass video, so join me there.